Right here is the tool path where the cutter is. And I'm cutting out the right mount for the Fiat 500 Abarth. This hasn't been without problems, but in the past I've done it through traditional methods of cutting and milling and clamping and facing. So I drew this out on my CAD program, and currently the milling machine is carving it out. I've had to slow the feed down, pick up the cutter size. I actually should have used a 2-flute cutter. I'm using a 5-flute carbide, and that is a little bit too fine of a cut for what I'm doing. The oil is there to make sure the bit doesn't clog, because that's what's been happening. The flutes would clog on the tool, and then it would jam and snap the bit. So far so good. I'm only 200 thou into the block of 1-inch aluminum, and we'll see what happens. Well, we're proceeding here. I've had some problems. I've snapped some cutters. I've had a few issues with the milling machine. I'm using a 5-flute carbide, which I really should be using a 2-flute HS milling cutter. But anyways, I wanted to try to get through this, and little by little it's happening. The oil is stopping the flutes from loading, and the air is pushing the chips out of the way. I've got about 1/8 of an inch to go before I'm finished cutting through this piece, and then it'll do the recesses. I'm going to have to change the clamping arrangement. One of the mistakes, and when I was starting to figure this all out, I forgot something. After about 1.5 hours of machining, this is what I have. It's a little hard to see, but once we get it out of the unclamped and take a look at it, it'll become a little bit more apparent. There's still more work to be done on this mount. It needs standoffs to clear the timing belt. Even the stock mount is quite robust, although it's cast and it has webs in it to lower the weight. This is even heavier than the stock mount. But what you can see here are these holes, and we spiral cut them with a 1/4-inch end mill, and those will be tapped out for the snail mount. And then these 6 bolts are also used to hold it to the engine block. And there's another mount that's basically a piece of angle iron or angle aluminum, 3-inch by 3-inch, and it's got a press sleeve that has to go on it as well. So there's still a little bit more to do on this mount. It is a complicated part, but it's necessary to install in this engine end platform. Well, this is the mount. I've milled it out. I've found it already, possibly my error, or the machine's error, but possibly my error, that my holes aren't lining up properly for the snail mount. So what I'm going to have to do is re-drill them, or actually slot the snail mount a little bit just to accommodate. But I think I can work with that. And just take a look at a little bit of little rough edges here. I've got to still trim off with a file, and see how it mounts up onto the engine. So that mount now is going to have to go over right here. That's where it's going to end up replacing. So, yeah, and on this timing cover. Well, we'll get to it eventually. It appears that all my bolt holes line up. I took these locations off of actually a casting, the spare one that came off of the other car, which is here. I'll just leave that on the floor. So all these line up, but now what I have to do is make spacers, because when you look at this mount, you can see the depth that's required, and there's this void here, which I've got a mill on the back. That's for the tensioner that has to go in there. So, so far this isn't working out too bad. I'm not sure if I should have mailed this on this side. That may have had to been on the other side, but oh well. This is going to be a little bit of a custom deal for Bob Martin. Well, I've got the mount in. I've got the spacers made up. We're not welded yet. You can see between it to give it clearance. And these 6 bolts actually only bolt onto the cylinder head. And this one here down at the bottom actually is on a split sleeve and is part of it as well. So I'm going to have to weld this side here and around the back and the front, but when I get set up to do all my welding. Okay, what I've done here is I've done some welding. If you remember, I had a hole in here, and I filled that in with weld. I put a piece of rod in and 3/8 rod in the hole, and then fused it in, and then continued to TIG weld it. Doesn't look too bad. This is a 1-inch thick piece of metal, and my Miller welding machine only goes up to about 140 amps. So you can't weld 1-inch aluminum with a 140 amp TIG welding machine. But what I do is I preheat the part with a propane torch, and once the part gets hot enough, then you can weld it. So it takes a little bit of more effort. I've done some tack welds on the back. I'm not sure if you can see it, but right now it's in the cooling down process, so we're going to let it take its time. It's going to cool down, and then we're going to test fit the part. And there's just a little bit of milling for some timing belt clearance that has to be done as well. Just one little mention here. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 holes plus the stud. The stud is in the cast iron block, and the rest of those bolts are on top or bolted to the cylinder head. So that's why it's got 6 bolts in it, and it's got all those standoffs. It's unlike the Fiat X1 where the actual snail mount was mounted to the block. This design does not do that, so that's probably why they have 6 bolts holding it plus the stud onto the block. What I've done now is I've fastened this in the milling machine and planed this off with a shell mill, so that they're all the same height, and we won't have any distortion or any issues with this fitting onto the head. This is the right side completed. The mount's on, the covers. This turbocharger piping, it's going to have to be relocated, so that's not going to be an issue for now. But the new snail mount's on here, stainless steel. There are 7 bolts holding this on, including that, or 6 bolts plus the stud, so there's 7 points. Those 6 bolts are bolted into the head. That was a stud out of the block. So that's what I have on my car. It seems to be okay now that I've put a stainless steel snail mount rather than the original cast Fiat X1 1500 engine cast aluminum mount. Okay, the mill's running and it's carving out this bracket. My machine isn't a real fast machine, but it's probably faster than I could lay it out by hand and machine all the corners and the radiuses. So we'll let this keep going, and I'll see how long it took to carve the part out when we're done. Currently I'm at 14 minutes, so I'm sure it'll take another 14 minutes to do this. Well, it took about 1 hour and 3 minutes to chew that out of the piece of 1/2-inch aluminum. Possibly I could speed up my milling machine a little bit, but I didn't want to take a chance with it. So next time we'll go a little bit faster. See how it goes.